I've spoken with you before, Veronica, about your story in these kind of teen rehabilitation programs, as they call it.
My place is like the tip of the iceberg, pretty
Right,
much, for this
right.
industry.
So delighted to be joined also by Catherine, Wendy, and Rachel, who have their own stories and involvement after their experiences. So I think a good place to start would be just hearing from folks as much as you want to share about your personal experience. Um, we'll start with, Veronica, you could kind of give a quick, if people didn't see our first interview, sorry to say quick, I know it's not a quick story, but, kind of a description of how old you were when your father had dropped you off to go to this center and, your experience.
Yeah, so I was 15 years old when I was taken by a hired kidnapper from a Walmart parking lot and taken across state lines from California to Salt Lake City, Utah, where I was handed off to two other hired transporters who took me to the high Utah desert outside of Lehigh and Salt Lake City and dropped me off at a behavior modification boot camp next to a biological chemical weapons facility operated by the US government. I spent 2 months there. I was actually supposed to spend much longer there, but my dad didn't want to pay anymore, and that is the only reason that I was pulled out of this industry. But if it weren't for that, if it weren't for the financial factors, my dad would have been all willing to send me fully into the industry, including into a RTC, residential treatment center, after the boot camp that I was in. Every other girl from the camp that I was in was sent to a residential treatment facility where it's usually a standard procedure for children to be put through solitary confinement in order to break them when they first enter the on-site facility. The industry that I was in, the boot camp that I was in, it's a NATSAP research designated program. It has NATSAP membership, partnership. It is one of the many facilities owned and operated by Aspen Education Group, whose parent company is Bain Capital, who, like I had mentioned beforehand, is founded by Mitt Romney, who is the senator of the state of Utah.
And your father, who dropped you off there, I don't know your relationship now, but in your experience, was he aware of what they do there? Are other parents kind of aware of what they do at these camps?
No, my dad had absolutely no idea. These types of facilities, this industry, it capitalizes off of unknowing parents, usually parents that are easy to deceive as well. Like my father, who doesn't really know how to ask questions. He's not that type of person, really. Still to this day, he still doesn't really fully accept what he sent me into. I've shown him tons of data, tons of information. The only thing that really is any concern to him is the fact that it has anything to do with the GOP, and that's the only thing that he actually cares about.
Right, that Bain Capital and other. Catherine, you've been very active in advocacy for this. I don't know if you have a personal story, whatever you want to share.
Yeah. So when I was 14 years old, I actually got sent to a place called Provo Canyon School. Sorry about the noise. At the time, I was, 14 years old. My family had gone through a bit of trauma with my sister passing away due to cancer. And I was, without saying it out loud, I was struggling with my sexuality, knowing I was gay and not knowing how to really express that. So I was kind of mouthing off to my parents more. I hadn't done drugs, had sex, run away or anything like that. But I was, rebellious in the sense of where I was like telling my parents off, and, voicing, basically saying no. A psychologist that I was going to basically recommended it. He was working at a company called Charter at the time, and Charter owned Provo Canyon School. So, I suspect, but I can't prove, there were some kickbacks involved, which was known to happen in the 90s. So my parents dropped me off at Provo Canyon School, which is located in Utah. It's an extreme lockdown, actually. And I stayed there for, almost a year, my first time there. And, fun fact, I was actually there with Paris Hilton. That's kind of how I ended up in the Paris Hilton documentary, This is Paris, a couple of years back, because we kind of reunited over that shared experience. Provo Canyon School has been open since the 70s. It's changed ownership, but one of the things that it's kind of known for is, solitary confinement, which is, called observation. If you disagree, physical takedowns, if you say no and you refuse to do an order, a lot of heavy medication, which doesn't match a diagnosis, and a lot of like behavioral modification, milieu, based type of therapy, which means like trying to force conformity in behavior. I stayed there for almost a year. I came back, and I felt completely lost in the real world. And, a year and a half goes by, I kind of like start to repeat the same things of being a teenager and kind of mouthing off and stuff. And the next time I got sent away.
And when you came back, you were about what, 16?
No, I actually came back. So I was 14. So I came back when I was 15. And
Okay.
so when I'm, a year and a half later, 16 and a half, and I'm, still not having sex, still not having, running away, doing drugs, any of that stuff. But I still I was starting to wake up and realize that was messed up. So, I think I struggled with my relationship with my parents. I was, staying up all night playing on the computer, doing, stuff like that. And my parents this time found a place online. It was a place called Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs, or WASP. And they offered behavioral modification in other countries. So this time my parents knew that I wouldn't they wouldn't just be able to drop me off at this place. I'd know better. So I was woken up in the middle of the night and kidnapped by, hired escorts. I didn't even see my parents as I was leaving. They were just kind of grabbed me and walked me out of the house and didn't explain what was happening. And I thought I was actually legitimately getting kidnapped, and they were telling me I was going to a place in Mexico. Which is terrifying. You're 16 and a half years old. You don't see your parents as you're leaving. It's in the middle of the night. You're disoriented and confused, and you're thrown in the back of a car and told you're going to another country. And it was terrifying. Wasn't until I got all the way down there that I realized oh crap. I was immediately strip searched by kids that were my own age. Had my clothes taken away, much like I had at Provo Canyon School. I was kind of glossing over a lot of this because I know there's a lot of other people that need to share. I stayed in Casa for about 6 months, and the name of the school is Casa by the Sea. And it was like hell. It was attack therapy, no therapist, it was grueling, dirty conditions, scabies, lice, not being able to shower properly, not always having soap, any kind of we weren't allowed to talk for 23 hours a day or non-verbally communicate. The only time we were allowed to talk was 1 hour a day for group, where it was pretty much like Lord of the Flies, attack therapy, where you would be forced to give feedback, harsh feedback to somebody. And it basically teaches people that they had to attack other people to move up in status or level system, or else you'd be the one attacked. Every 4 to 6 weeks, we'd have something called seminars, which were 3 to 4 day intensive, intensive emotional growth seminars, which were, think of it as that's where you think, when you think of brainwashing, in the classical sense, that's where it happens. You break you down with sleep deprivation, less food, intense attacking and peer pressure. And again, I'm just going through this really quickly. And over a course of 4 days. And if you don't pass these seminars in a certain order, you basically can't leave the program. So you're you have this pressure to conform to whatever they need, or else you're never going to leave, or at least until you turn 18. After 6 months or so of being at this place and not moving forward, I think my parents and the way that the owners were treating my parents, I think my parents realized it was really messed up, but they didn't want me to come back home and didn't want to have to deal with me being a teenager. So they sent me back to Provo Canyon School. I stayed there for another year until I turned 18. And yeah, that's kind of where I was. I got out and I realized, like, whoa, like I just spent 2.5 years of my teenagehood. That was messed up. Um, and I think I kind of like repressed it for about 18 years or so until one of my friends that I knew from CASA killed himself. And that, back in 2017. And that kind of woke me up to, how much I was pushing down. And since then, I've been really working hard with on the activism side, trying to get, do awareness and other things. And I personally work in technology and cybersecurity. So the one thing I'm good at is finding records, being able to, put them out there. And that's where the idea of my archive came from.
And a couple questions. So you mentioned they strip searched you at about 15?
14 at Provo and 16 at CASA.
So they completely naked to a 14-year-old. For what reason did they give? Checking if you had weapons or something?
Yeah, drugs or anything. So you were forced to strip down and you had to squat and cough, which it doesn't make sense because
It's like what they do to prisoners.
Yeah,
They did that to me as well.
Yeah, but also, like, let's just be honest, like the anatomy, like you're not just going to cough and everything falls out. I mean,
right.
It's silly as it is, but like they want to make sure that you don't have things hidden anywhere. And, first it felt incredibly invasive. The other thing they do at these places is they force you to do pelvic exams too with a gynecologist. You are forced to do so, like as a teenager. If you look at like medical recommendations, you're not supposed to have your first OBGYN exam and that, the invasive one until you're at least 21 years old. You are forced to do it in these places, at least in Utah I was. And if you don't, they will force you to do it, like hold you down and force you. And so there were girls coming in there that had traumatic histories of sexual assault and things like that. And it didn't matter. They were forced to strip down. They were forced to have pelvic exams. Like it didn't matter what your trauma history was. It didn't matter if you were sexually active or not. You were still, if you had an experience, any experience with drugs, they still treated you the same way, no matter what.
Well, you were also a minor. So I believe you're supposed to have a parent approve any of those types of procedures.
They make you write a like if the parents they do like a blanket medical thing, but they don't tell the parents in detail what they're about to do. The other thing that's interesting is that I'm a citizen of California. In California, 14 is the age of medical consent. But think about how crazy it is that in California, you can't. After I'm the age of 14, I have the right to sign myself out of treatment. I have the right to say, no, I don't want a pelvic exam. But so legally I have certain rights in California, but somebody can still pay someone to kidnap me in the middle of the night and haul me across state lines and force me to do it there.
Yeah, parents are generally required to sign away 51% of custody. So ultimately, what their wishes don't really matter.
Wow. And the other thing I wanted to ask you, Catherine, you mentioned, you kind of knew you were gay, but they, it seems like these boot camps are in many ways try to, get the gay out of you or however they phrase it. Was there any types of programs like that towards you?
So I want to be very fair to my parents. My parents didn't know I was gay. And if my parents had known I was gay, they wouldn't have cared. They wouldn't have given two shits. But if I had come out in Provo Canyon School, that would not have been okay. Like people were punished pretty harshly. I saw other people be punished or have to go to like specialists when they said they were gay or trans or anything like that. So I knew pretty well I got to keep in the closet. Like it's not okay to be gay. An interesting thing though is that in 2020 Utah banned conversion therapy. And I was in DC a couple months ago, and DC is a one-party consent district, and Utah is a one-party consent state. So I decided to call a couple of those, just a couple months ago, 2 years after they banned conversion therapy. I decided to call a couple of troubled teen programs, and I was going to be a wealthy mother from Orange County, and my daughter is, she's fine generally, but she just admitted she was bisexual, and I think she's being peer pressured. Every single program I called in Utah offered to help fix her. even though
Wow.
conversion therapy is illegal. I actually recorded the calls and put them online. So
Unbelievable.
they're
And I have to, I mean, it's a dumb question, but I have to imagine both the physical invasiveness, having to repress who you were, and then repressing this, I think you said for 18 years, probably doesn't help your mental health.
No, and I think that another hard thing is because you see therapy as the abuser, it's hard to actually want to go to therapy. It took me until I was, 18 years out of the program, to decide to go to therapy again. And when you see normal teenage sexuality in any expression punished, so I got out of the program at 18, never having kissed anybody or knowing I didn't know how to hit on anyone. I didn't know how to we weren't allowed to hug people or be physically affectionate. So I just I kind of just didn't know how to interact with people or on a normal healthy sexual level or just the normal kind of physical affections you learn from teenage interaction.
Right.
I'm lucky in the sense that I think that more of the stuff that I deal with from a mental health perspective is the trauma and the hypervigilance that come from some of that stuff. But there are people that go into these programs that do have genuine mental health issues. Not all of them, not even the majority, but it's hard when your trauma is so tied to therapy to trust, a psychiatrist or a therapist again after that. How do you do that when it's so triggering because your trauma is rooted in that in the first place?
Well, also, there's a lot of teenagers that are just teenagers who act out. There's nothing wrong with them. They go in there kind of as normal teenagers, some of them, more unruly than others, but nothing, toxic. And they go in just as unruly teenagers and they come out really fucked up and traumatized.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen that. I knew a girl in Casa that was sent away. Her parents were very strict religious, Mormon. And her dad basically saw her, caught her stealing a candy bar. I kid you not. True story. And he was worried that she was going to gain too much weight and not be able to be married away into the church. So he sent her away to Mexico, and she stayed there for almost 2 years. She was 5'7", 125 pounds. I remember the staff would come and weigh her every day to make sure she wasn't gaining too much weight per her father's wishes.
Unbelievable.
If you can pay, you can send your kid away, pretty much.
Rachel, feel free to jump in whenever because I can't see you. So if you want to add anything, just cut me off.
No, it's as long as the checks keep coming, you can keep your kid detained, even in a foreign country where the age of majority may actually be higher than 18.
I was
You mentioned a foreign country. These are not just in America.
Yeah, no, Katie's program was in Mexico. Their program, well, not so much anymore, but back
Samoa
when
and
she was
Jamaica are
detained,
popular.
Samoa, Costa Rica, Jamaica, Mexico, the Czech Republic, all of these places. And in most of those places, the age of majority is over 18.
And places like Teen Challenge, they also have entire social media profiles for all these different countries. There's a Teen Challenge UK, there's a Teen Challenge Canada, and they operate like propaganda pages pretty much for the different facets of this global teen challenge.
What's really astounding about that, because both Veronica and Wendy use the term kidnapping in their experience, it's one thing. It's already pretty horrifying if you're kidnapped and you're brought to a desert or another state. I know you were brought to Utah, Veronica, but to be kidnapped and brought to another country, I mean, that's got to be incredibly terrifying. I want to bring in Wendy Ann here to share kind of what your experience in this is. Anything you want to share about what got you involved.
Okay. And I wanted to just echo, it's not just terrifying. If we want to be authentic about it, it's child trafficking.
Yeah.
It's child trafficking for money.
Yeah.
Benefits trafficking is one of the things that applies.
Sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, we probably want to touch on benefits trafficking at some point. Just to give a brief synopsis of my story, I struggled with my mental health as long as I can remember. So as long as I was old enough to realize that mental health was a thing. I had a suicide attempt at 14 with basically everything in the medicine cabinet, and my mother hoarded Tylenol, so there was a lot. And I was given essentially no treatment because my insurance was Kaiser. So I was treated in the ER and given a couple of visits with a social worker and sent on my way to muddle through life. At 16, I was suicidal again, checked myself into a hospital where I was immediately almost sexually assaulted. So to speak to what Katie said, the doctor was not going to take my no for an answer, that he was not allowed to give me a pelvic examination without a nurse present or my permission. I threatened to scream and he changed his mind. I was sent out though for a visit with a gynecologist that I didn't want.
Why would you need a, what was the reason they would give a pelvic exam if you went in there for a mental health crisis?
He couldn't give me any reason.
Wow.
I couldn't trust him after that. I mean, as far as I was concerned, he was out to molest me.
Right.
And I was there for 3 months under his care. Well, more than 3 months, because after the 3 months inpatient, I was in an outpatient program where no one was progressing. And so I lost patience with that. I desperately pleaded to be sent back to high school where I could get some education, because that's the other thing children don't get in these programs is education. I was a gifted student in advanced programs and was given my textbooks from high school and said, here, do the quizzes in the chapters. That was my education for 9 months. And so I really lost patience with that. I wanted education again. Got in an argument with my mother. An ambulance arrived. I was trussed up in leather restraints in an ambulance and taken to another, against my will, of course, to another hospital where I was essentially stored until the transporters came to kidnap me and take me to Utah in a Cessna. I had very limited experience with flying. It was terrifying going from San Diego from the tiny airport in San Diego, the municipal one, not the main one, all the way to Utah, flying very low in a Cessna with another person, another very drugged up teenager.
And how old were you at this time?
I was 16.
Okay.
And I believe he was a similar age, but unable to communicate, drooling next to me in the plane with 4 very large adults and the pilot. Those 4 very large adults came to my hospital. So I don't know who they left the drooling person with. If there were other transporters involved in his kidnapping that left him with those 4 adults after they got to the airport. All I know is he was on the plane when I got on it. So we went to Provo Canyon School, just like Katie, although earlier. I was there while Provo was transitioning from being Provo and being all boys until I believe 3 years before I got there, to being owned by charter. So while I was there, physical abuse was the only punishment. The physical abuse was you will stand and stare at the wall 16, 18 hours a day, 30 minutes or 25 minutes at a time, and then you could sit for 5 minutes. That was the punishment for any infraction of any kind, including what they called a trend, which was if your room was not clean enough or your clothing was not appropriate, or you misspoke to someone 3 times in the same week. You would be given 150 of those investment periods, they called them, those 30 minutes. You were not allowed to go to school while you had those investment periods. After the first 150, then you could do the rest on your own time and be allowed to return to classes. The education was not terrible. It wasn't challenging for a gifted kid, but it wasn't terrible. It really felt like actual high school. And some of the teachers seemed to care. I was allowed to, if I was able to memorize all the bones in the body, I was allowed to go on a field trip to Brigham Young University and examine the cadavers. So that was fascinating. I actually got one experience of educational enrichment in my 11 and a half months there. I was working very, very, very soon. So that forced work thing is a thing. Although I need to backtrack a minute because there was more sexual abuse before the working. You start out in the investment unit where all the punishment happens. So every person who comes into where the punishment happens, or at least that's how it was when I was there. So you're watching everyone being punished when you arrive.
Mm-hmm.
You spend a period of time there while they assess you, and then you're moved to the next unit. That next unit is essentially storage, sometimes for sometimes for the girls' entire stay there, sometimes until they were able to prove that they could function at the hotel. The hotel was actually off-site all the way at the other end of University Avenue. So we were bused back and forth between the campus and the hospital and the hotel where we lived. In that intermediate unit, I had my tonsils removed while I was there, medically neglected, not given soft food to eat, not given food that I could eat that wouldn't get stuck in my wounds, not given pain medication or assistance when I asked for it. One night when I went, I was bleeding, I was spitting out blood, and I went to report it. I did eventually get taken back to the hospital that night, but first I observed what was going on in the office at night, which was sexual favors in exchange for shower privileges. So girls were on their knees in order to get first shower. And I was warned that if I said anything, I would be next. So that is what I observed while I was in pain trying to recover from having my tonsils removed. So then I went back to the ER.
And again, what did they ever give reasoning for these things? Removing your tonsils, this and that? I mean,
I had struggled with sore throats my entire childhood, and the reason I was allowed to get this mental health treatment finally was a transition in insurance from Kaiser, which is an HMO that started in California, to Aetna. I was also told that my stay at Provo Canyon School was my lifetime benefit for Aetna, that I would not be allowed to participate in Aetna in the future. So if I were offered Aetna through an employer, I wouldn't be able to have that insurance, that was all the money Aetna would ever spend on me. I was informed of that while I was in Utah. So that was one of the things to ponder while I'm being up at night.
Gotta love the for-profit health insurance industry.
Yeah, that enabled all of this. Right. It also, Aetna did not allow visits. So it took a lot of talking to. I wasn't given the normal visits to transition back home from the hospital. Longer stays were very common then. 3, 4, 5 months was not unusual. Kids were actually given the chance to respond to their medications and do better. And passes home were part of the process of reintegrating. I wasn't allowed to do that because my insurance said if I was well enough to go home, I was well enough to stay home, which was interesting. Also, I was not given any medication at any point. I didn't want any, and for some reason that was honored. I'm very confused as to why that was honored, but I was not given any psychiatric medication. So that part is especially fascinating, that it wasn't forced on me. I wasn't convinced to take it. I wasn't told that was something I needed. So that's particularly bizarre, since I was in treatment for so long. So after I recovered from the tonsillectomy pretty quickly, it was a pretty meteoric rise through the levels in Provo's level system. I was transferred within the first 4 months to live at the hotel, and you had to do slave labor in exchange for your life there. I worked in their restaurant. I cleaned the men's room, like the public men's room. They hosted conferences, so there were lots of drunken people at night. So that was disgusting. I cleaned hotel rooms that were first swept by hotel staff to make sure there was nothing I could find that I might enjoy having or might be contraband. But then I was there to clean up the messes, and you can imagine messes that drunken adults leave in hotel rooms. They took out the beer bottles and stuff, but they left the vomit and snot and all of the other things that you wouldn't want to clean as a child. So that was my job. Also cleaned the windows and stuff, and we had to do all of our own. That was the other child labor part, is Provo had very little maintenance staff. There was a janitor, and there were a couple of ladies that worked in the kitchen. The students did all of the cleaning of the classrooms at night, often until midnight or 1 a.m. If it was your turn to do it, you did it. And, cleaned the hallways and the offices and everything. Washed all the dishes, worked in rotation as assistants to the cook, which was actually kind of fun because you could sneak into the walk-in and steal chocolate chip cookie dough that was frozen. And that's also part of the problem at Provo, is that a lot of girls were told that they treated eating disorders. They did not treat eating disorders. They did not serve healthy food. Most girls gained large amounts of weight. Some girls refused to eat, and nobody monitored whether they went to the bathroom after meals. So girls were continuing to purge and restrict, and 3 of them left on stretchers, and I'm told they didn't survive.
Wow.
I don't know for sure. I don't have proof. But heart attack was what I was told that they had, which commonly happens if a person loses enough body fat. And these girls were skeletal. It was terrifying to look at them. And all the knobs in their spine, every bone that you can see. And we lived in close quarters, so I couldn't not see them. And they continued to get more skeletal until they left on a stretcher. So medical neglect was definitely a thing throughout my stay there. So yeah, stayed in the hotel, worked in the hotel. My Social Security benefit statement says that I made $4,000. I left with nothing. I was told that my outings covered or used all my money. I went on none of the ski trips. I declined them. I don't like cold weather sports, and I was afraid I'd hurt myself. So I didn't go on ski trips. I was not taken rafting. That was a thing that happened before and after my stay, but not during my stay for girls. The boys went rafting. The girls were not allowed. Not sure why. Probably a staffing issue. Didn't go horseback riding. That was in the brochures, though, of course.
Of course.
Did go to the circus on one visit to Salt Lake City. Went to the planetarium and saw a laser show with Rush music. That was amazing. And went out to restaurants about once a month. And then once a week, if you were good, you could participate in the Little Caesar pizza party on one day and chips and dip on a different day. And they tried to tell me that those 3 outings and a few dinners here and there and pizza and chips and dip, took up my $4,000 in 1988 money. And I really don't think so.
Question for all of you. Now, what was the communication like? Were you able to contact your parents, relatives while you were there? Or did they
One of my punishments was for picking up the phone. I was punished for 3 days of no school and standing and staring at the wall for picking up the phone. And it was supposed to be a much larger punishment.
Part of this was depriving your ability to kind of sound the alarm.
You were not allowed access to phones to talk to patient advocates. That was not a thing. And that was a thing I was aware was supposed to happen because it was on the wall at the hospitals in California.
Right.
California has the laws. The second you leave California, you lose all the rights of a citizen of California.
I had tried to get emancipated. I did not want to go home, but I didn't want to go to Utah. And so that process had just started when the goons showed up to take me to Utah. Like I was talking to the patient advocate and my case was supposed to be heard in court. And so that's when the doctor told my mother to get me out of California.
I was going to say, so Provo Canyon School used to restrict mail going out, but there was an ACLU case against a lawsuit against Provo Canyon School in the 70s, and they won the right. They basically sanctioned Provo. Some of the physical abuse, certain types of physical abuse they weren't allowed to do anymore, but they found their way around that, obviously. But mail is one of those things. They were not allowed to read outgoing mail anymore. So you could seal your letter and send it out unrestricted, but they can read it coming in. When I was at CASA, we were only allowed to send a letter to our parents, and we were not allowed to seal it. And they would use a Sharpie and just scratch out anything they didn't want. A lot of programs are like that. It just depends on geography and oversight. It's crazy, though, to think that your rights, depending on where your geography is, changes so drastically in the United States.
I was not allowed to seal my letters. I have no idea which letters got out, which ones didn't. No way to check on that. because I was not allowed access to most of the people I was writing to talk to on the phone. So I didn't know what letters they got and what they didn't. I was allowed to open my own mail, but only in the presence of my therapist.
So
So
they deprived you of basically, you know, talking to your parents and telling
or
them you were
anyone.
being right.
Yeah,
That
I
was
received mail
the
once a
same.
week at the most.
Mhm.
Because if I didn't have an appointment with my therapist, I didn't get my mail that week. So at the most, I got mail once a week. And phone calls were monitored and collect. So I was only allowed to speak to people who were willing to pay for a collect call. And a collect call at that time was a minimum of $75 for like a 20-minute conversation.
Jesus. Rachel, I'd love to bring you in. However much you want to share about your story and.
Sure thing. I have been working as an activist in this movement for the past couple of years. I attended 5 programs between 2007 and 2010. I am happy to report that as of 2 months ago, all 5 of them have been closed.
Okay.
My friend Kelsey
They were closed on their own accord, or the government took action?
my friend and fellow survivor Kelsey and I closed one of them through a media campaign a little over a year ago. A large lawsuit was filed against another earlier this year. One went bankrupt, and another was Second Nature, which, as Veronica mentioned, disbanded and what remained renamed itself.
Mhm.
So I went to Second Nature twice for a total of 6 months in the wilderness, where I sustained permanent spinal damage. When I went to a physical therapist for like an unrelated work injury in my 20s, because I used to be a cook before I was told that my body can't do that anymore.
And when you were first sent there, how old were you?
I was first sent away 10 days before my 15th birthday.
Oh my God. And the wilderness, was it, when you say wilderness, where was this and what were the
The
conditions?
high desert of Utah, it was so cold. It was the coldest, snowiest winter Utah had in a very long time. That would have been 2008. Before that, I was in Vermont, which was also a very, very cold place. I'm from Texas.
Wow.
But like I was saying, I went to a physical therapist for an unrelated work injury when I was 24, and they took some imaging of my back, and they asked what happened to me. And what happened to me was I was a teenage girl with really no athletic experience at all outside of dance class, being forced to carry a 70-pound backpack on untold number of mile hikes per day for months on end, and my spine, and I suspect my knees at this point, now that I'm in my 30s and my knees make weird sounds, I suspect my knees couldn't really handle it either.
Mhm.
I also attended a program called the John Dewey Academy, which is the one my friend and I closed through a press campaign. It was an independently owned program operated by a serial sex offender named Tom Bratter, who is thankfully deceased, who raped what we believe to be at least 4 girls in the early 90s. And when pursued legally for this, was able to pay $200,000 in 1994 money, plead no contest, and continue running his school and interacting with minors on a daily basis. which he continued to do until the day he died in 2012, making lewd sexual remarks to young girls, including myself. I'm not going to go into the details of the things that were said to me here, but if anyone's interested, we talk about it in one of the articles my friend and I did. At this program, there was a lot of attack therapy, between 2 and 4 hours a day, every day. And the average stay was 2 years. Although when I was there at the peak of the financial crisis in 2008, the entire graduating class had been there for 3 years for reasons that cannot be anything other than racketeering. Sorry, I get a little, it's not easy for me to talk about. We had a lot of cruel and unusual punishments here. I wore a sign that says, "I'm a waste of time and money," for 4 months around my neck. I was ultimately expelled for reasons that became clear to me after years away from the situation, and people coming forward and telling me what was going on, that people were having sex in secret. And when the Lord of the Flies mentality kicked in, no one wanted to have sex with me. And when crazy old man Butter said there was dead weight in the community, I was the one sacrificed, cast out because I was a little overweight. And I say a little overweight, I was a medium. It was just he liked his girls skinny, and he really drilled into the boys that girls needed to be skinny. So I got kicked out of there after 14 months for not being skinny, I guess. Sent back to the wilderness, sent to Vista, which we sued and shut down. And the properties are being sold off, but the realtor selling off the property for $1.3 million is, of course, related to the program owner because it's Utah, and that's just how things work. Sent there to finish high school because at that point I'd been in the system for 3 years and had no real education to show for it, and my parents just wanted me to be done with it. But my predatory education consultant convinced them to send me to Vista under false pretenses. They had no idea I would be attending another treatment center, and that's exactly what it was. They were told I'd just be living in a house and going to school. So they believed that. I finished school as fast as I possibly could. Did my entire senior year in about 4 months because the education is fake and you just teach yourself out of a book. And at the time, the education standards in Utah were pretty lax. You didn't need a lot of credits in anything to graduate high school. So I got the hell out. I now realize I was having like pretty severe PTSD symptoms from John Dewey the entire time I was there, which I still have to this day. Clearly, you can hear that in speaking with me about that right now. I don't want to really get weighed down in a lot of timeline and history and all the things that happened to me there. I would rather talk about all of the incredible things that we've done over the last couple of years to really make difference. And we've seen that in, just the programs I've mentioned closing down. I live in Oregon, where I've been fortunate enough to be involved in some legislative processes on bills that passed some pretty tough regulation on the industry in Oregon. And now there's only one wilderness program left here, and it's the only state in the country that has any sort of requirements for education consultants. And we've got a federal bill in the works. And there's just been so much awareness on social media. Like, if you say to someone, like, have you seen, like, on TikTok, those kids who, like, get sent to the wilderness? Like, I'll probably say yes. And that's definitely not anything I ever would have expected from this thing that I had tried for a decade to just pretend had never happened.
And can I ask all of you, I mean, we all have our hang-ups, right? And, you know, quirks, but I would have to think it's incredibly hard when you go through this as a teenager or any age to then be able to open up as far as romantic relationships, even friendships, even maybe working with others that, you know, I'm not a psychologist, but can you kind of talk to how this affected you as far as, you know, the normal things in life, whether it's relationships or your work?
I'd love to speak to that, actually.
Sure.
It's really tragically common for survivors of this industry to fall into abusive relationships. That definitely happened to me. Boyfriends in college, my first husband. So many of us become survivors of domestic violence after being detained in this industry, because abuse is really normalized as how love is shown. And that's really, like, if they're not screaming at me, they don't care about me. If they're not hitting me, they don't care about me. And also a lot of, like, weird things involving like consent and sexuality and things that could ultimately be a whole nother conversation. As far as work goes, I definitely had a much easier time when I could work as a cook, because it was just something I was good at. And like people yell at you, but it's not like personal. Like, no one really cares. And I was good at what I did, so I didn't really like get yelled at that much. But when I had to stop and transition into like office work, it's really hard for me, like incredibly triggering. And because of a lot of the things that were like brainwashed into believing, even more so than most people in like this capitalist hellscape, our sense of worth is like really, really tied to productivity and able to contribute to capitalism, especially after so many of us participated in, you know, forced unpaid labor as youth, like I did at John Dewey Academy. We did all the cooking, all the cleaning, all the food ordering, all the maintenance, all of it. Like, I will say I was ready to like get on a line and start cooking immediately, like when I left. But I don't know if that's like necessarily a skill an 18-year-old needs to have. Like, maybe it would have been nicer to not have been experienced being literally cast out. But I know a lot of us really struggle with employment as well, just because those relationships and those hierarchies are so difficult and so triggering.
So yeah, I can definitely speak to that. I was in domestically violent relationships. Both of my children's fathers tried to strangle me until the lights went out. And I didn't know, any better until I knew better. Still struggle with relationships though. Currently divorcing at age 51. And the idea of productivity, when your mental health is destroyed, is really, really difficult. I did end up on Social Security disability. My records for my psychiatrist when I was 30, my psychiatrist got my records from Provo, he said. I never saw them, so I don't know. Maybe he just believed me. Seems unusual since I left there at 16. But I got Social Security disability and was approved and paid in 4.5 months. Like, that never happens. But just for the basis of my spotty work record and the treatment that I got as a kid. And it took a long time to claw my way out of that. I've been off Social Security disability for 2 years now. I work as a psychotherapist. I graduated with my master's in 2013, got licensed in 2019. Hello, pandemic, looking for a job as a therapist. But also the idea of trusting therapists. Like, I've never been able to go beyond surface level. I've never done any trauma work on myself. There, you get the deer in the headlight looks from therapists. I don't know how many of us have tried to go and get therapy. Recently, I was seeing someone at BetterHelp who was a grief therapist, was fantastic. She left BetterHelp because BetterHelp was terrible for therapists. And I went back to a place that I had gotten therapy previously. And the first person I saw, I got that deer of the headlights look, and then I got an email with referrals. He didn't tell me he wasn't going to help me, but I got an email with referrals to elsewhere because he thought my case was too complex. So as a therapist, I'm struggling to get therapy. I'm still on Medicare because I've recently out of Social Security disability, and Medicare doesn't like to pay for therapy. My Medicare Advantage plan does not have that as a benefit. So I have to pay out of pocket. That's lovely. And yeah, it's difficult in relationships. And you know, let me know when we've closed the relationship subject. I want to give everyone a chance to comment, but also I wanted to speak to Katie's comment about the foster, how they've moved from insurance to foster care money and education, public education funds as a way to get more kids into this industry.
Gotcha. Veronica?
Yeah. So I definitely can absolutely relate to both what Rachel and Wendy Ann have relayed that they've experienced. Getting out of the boot camp I was in, my mom was also in an abusive relationship at the time, so I didn't really grow up with very good role models, examples. My father is also a very abusive figure. But when I got out, I was in a multitude of abusive relationships. The last serious relationship I was actually in, I ended up pressing charges against him for domestic violence, and I gave a victim impact statement in front of a judge. That's the last time that I saw him, was in the courthouse when I gave that statement. That was about 3 years ago now. I started really waking up and diving deep and looking into the troubled teen industry last year after my mom committed suicide. After years and years of dealing with her own complex trauma that she's experienced throughout her life, including also having been sent into the troubled teen industry to a therapeutic boarding school by my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, when my mother was also a teenager. So, and I started recognizing that pattern. I started connecting a lot of dots. I started realizing, I started questioning and realizing why my mom was the way she was, what contributed to her mental state, what compounded it, and what were the factors leading up to everything prior to me even being born. Like I really started asking a lot more questions and looking into things more, and that's what brought me to learning about Unsilenced and really getting into this activism work. And to add on to that, now currently there's a federal bill that is about to be introduced. It's called the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act, and it will impose a federal bill of oversight and regulation and reform on the industry. It'll impose a federal bill of rights for children sent into the congregate care industry, which disproportionately affects marginalized groups of people and is predominantly targets the foster care industry as well. There are people that are privately sent into this industry, but the good portion, the great majority of this industry and the money backing it up comes from the public sector and from marginalized groups that are targeted in a systemic fashion to be monetized.
There's been a big shift over the past like 5 to 10 years, I would say, away from the majority of kids being private pay, like everyone on this panel basically, towards more coming from the foster system. And it's really horrifying because if there's not a foster home for the just any child in the system, they can end up in a behavior modification program, which is really just terrifying.
And that dovetails with other legislation in California. In the, I want to say 2000, somewhere between 2010 and 2013, there was a lawsuit. It's called the Katie A lawsuit. Is that the Katie was a child who died because of mental health care neglect. I'm not sure of the details of her situation, but foster care is now required to provide, assess for, pay attention to the mental health needs of kids in foster care in California. But what that means is more kids end up in congregate care treatment programs. And then recently, California legislation was passed saying that California kids had to come home. So now I'm really interested in what kind of care is going to happen in California. I was sent to Utah because even back in 1987, it was illegal for a program in California to be locked if the length of stay was expected to be 6 months or more. You couldn't lock kids up for more than 6 months. So I was sent to Utah so I could be somewhere longer because I said I wouldn't stay if they sent me to a program. I wanted to be emancipated. So I wasn't going to stay. And they're like, well, if you say you're not going to stay, we'll send you someplace where you can be locked up. So now what are we going to do with kids who actually need treatment, who are a danger to themselves or others, within that legislation in California? So that's going to be interesting to see how that works out, because the last of the California kids have just been brought home that were placed in facilities all over the country. And I wanted to speak for a minute, if I can, about my relative and his course. I have a relative who was removed from his family at 12 and identified to have mental health concerns before he was removed that weren't treated well in Northern Virginia, where there isn't much to be given. His family couldn't meet his needs, and the system did a terrible job of stepping in and taking over. I think he had a total of 40 placements from the age 12 until he aged out. And he was in a facility called North Springs in Leesburg, Virginia, where 6 months previously a child had been abused to death, was restrained until he died. So it was terrifying visiting my nephew there. Being locked in the facility with him was triggering and terrifying. And the entire time I was there, there were constant alarms going off. And I asked him, what were the alarms about? He said, oh, somebody's being restrained. So they had changed nothing, even though they had a child die. And this was in 2018. So very recent. Facility still open. Wouldn't take him back when he needed to go back. I attempted to be foster parent for this child, but he was too damaged from everything he'd seen. He couldn't function in a home. He lasted here for 90 days before San Diego decided that it was too difficult to supervise his care and he should go back to his home state. And he was really poorly supervised in all those group homes. They're looking at legislation as part of this improving congregate care to make sure it's not legal for there to be no night staff, but it is still legal in some states for for foster children to be placed in group homes where no one is awake at night.
That's how it was the program I went to in Massachusetts in 2008. There was no requirement there were awake adults at any point.
And I don't think it's legal in Virginia, but it was still practiced. The staff would go to sleep on the job, and then my nephew would leave and run the streets with his with the other boys in the home, and became addicted to anything he could find. He also said staff gave him cigarettes, probably to keep him quiet. But he came to me just polysubstance addicted, and and of course foster care didn't tell me. That's the other thing, is they don't tell foster parents what the child's difficulties actually are, because they want to get the child placed in a home. as quickly as possible. And so these kids just bounce around. They get put in a foster home, they get sent back to congregate care, and hospitals in between while they're looking for a placement. And it's extremely expensive and incredibly ineffective.
And all that money would just be so much better spent on support for families.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
In the final minutes we have, I want to kind of follow the money here. Veronica has mentioned Bain Capital. There's a whole lot of politicians who know about this, who have done very little about this. Some politicians have, I think, tried to pass or craft bills to regulate or to remedy this. Could you kind of describe beyond Bain Capital who's making money here?
Oh, sorry, keep going. I get really excited about who's making money here.
Go ahead.
Okay, so if you have no conscience, right? This is a super easy way to make just like so much money so quickly and do whatever you want with it, and no one can say anything. So you can charge whatever you want. You can charge $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 a year. And desperate parents will think that is just what it costs to ensure my child has the best care. Meanwhile, that money is not being spent on the child's care. What is being spent on the child's care is minimal, as we see in case after case of neglect, inadequate staffing, neglect. All of that money is just being pocketed. And all the staff, they shift around from program to program and recreate these same money-making schemes. And then they band together and they form these parent companies where they hire child brokers who call themselves education consultants to prey on desperate parents using predatory sales techniques and lies in the form of incredibly deceptive brochures and threats that your child will end up dead, insane, or in jail, to get these parents to hire literal kidnappers to come into their child's bedroom in the middle of the night and transport them across state lines. That's not something that people thinking clearly do. That's not what is going to come into your mind naturally as this is how I'm going to parent my child. Somebody making money suggested that to you. And because there's no regulation, people can just do it. Lately, we've been seeing more survivors take these things to court, but for a long time, when there was no precedent, the assumption was just it's legal and it can be gotten away with.
Statutes of limitation also really restrict the ability to do lawsuits, because if I'm discharged, if I age out, I'm discharged at 18 in Utah, I have 2 years to file a lawsuit.
Meanwhile, the average time it takes to wake up from being in a cult is clocked at 11 years.
Right. And how many 19-year-olds even know what lawsuits are?
Right.
There are also lots of major campaign donors, to the GOP, that are heavily invested and tied to this industry. Namely, people like Mel Sembler, who's been one of the main echelons of the GOP establishment behind closed doors, that's been funding all of the campaigns of people within the Bush family, also people like Rick Scott, Ron DeSantis down in Florida, is Mel Sembler. He is a real estate hotshot who also is heavily invested in anti-drug campaigns. For instance, he was the financier to Keeping America Safe, which is an anti-drug organization that was headed by Liz Cheney. In turn for his the money that he has made politicians through the troubled teen industry, he's been given cushy ambassadorships. He was appointed to the ambassadorship of Italy under the Bush senior administration and the ambassadorship to Australia under George W. Bush. He was also the GOP's 2000 finance chair. He was also the vice chair to Donald Trump's 2016 campaign victory committee in more recent years. And he's a longtime donor to the GOP establishment, as I mentioned. Aside from that, Mike Pence, he's a major fundraiser for Crosswinds, who's the parent company of Caribbean Mountain Academy. His former deputy finance director and one-time assistant to Indiana's first lady, his wife, Karen Pence, is Brenda Gerber-Vincent, who is the vice president of development at Crosswinds. He also appointed Mike Terrell, the director of Crosswinds, to Indiana's Allen Superior Court Judicial Nominating Committee, which is a panel that selects judges who may decide what kids get sent into Crosswind boarding schools or to its detention center, the Pierceton Wood Academy.
Wow.
And then taking it even further back, decades prior back, the Reagan administration, the Reagans were longtime friends of David Wilkerson, the founder of WASP, the founder of Teen Challenge. Excuse me, sorry for misspeaking. The Reaganomics era of deregulation and the privatization of health services in the United States over the last 50 or so years has heavily embraced the models of care within the TTI. Ronald Reagan's also been on record praising Teen Challenge, saying, "I speak from more than 20 years of knowledge of the organization when I tell you that Teen Challenge programs work. The government can't do it alone, no matter how hard it tries." And then also Teen Challenge was a major part of Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign. Nancy Reagan actually visited a Teen Challenge center in Tennessee and did a whole photo op with residents there and staff members. And Teen Challenge on their social media pages, they still constantly share photos of those photo ops, like they're, throwback moments that are good time feels or something. There's a lot of political connections going back decades to this industry. And then in addition to that, there is a bipartisan complicity to it as well, in a way, because there are major politicians like Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader in the Senate. He is majorly connected to Bain Capital. He has received multiple contributions from Bain Capital over the years. Addition to that, Cory Booker is also financially tied to the troubled teen industry as well. So that's part of what keeps this industry so unregulated, is that so many of our representatives, so many of our congressmen, and so many of our elected officials are financially tied to this industry and making money off of it, and have been for decades. So they have a vested interest in not doing anything.
Right. And my last question is, what is the major momentum or activism right now? I believe Rokana and a few others have attempted legislation. What are the attempts right now to rein this just horrible exploitive industry in?
So right now, the major effort is the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act, or SICA, which is being introduced by Ro Khanna of California and Jeff Merkley of Oregon. It recently gained bipartisan support from a number of Republicans during a recent lobbying trip. I don't have an exact date for when the bill will be formally introduced, because those things are always super up in the air. At the state level, we have implemented some things in Oregon regarding transport companies, which are the companies that employ the people that come and kidnap kids in the middle of the night and take them to the desert or another country, as well as ed consultants, who are the child brokers who receive money from programs to give them clients. So I believe some other states are sort of cooking up some other sorts of bills in that vein. I know that Massachusetts has something going on specifically regarding aversive therapy, because there is a facility up there that is shocking patients, like legitimately shocking them with a device that they're connected to all the time and receive shocks for just about anything. It's really horrific. So there's that going on.
Most of those patients have developmental disabilities, correct?
Yeah. Yes. Developmental disabilities or autism. So Massachusetts has something going on there. And I believe New York also is trying to combat it in a slightly different way, basically by making it illegal for New York state agencies to refer clients to facilities that use aversive therapies, which is only the Judge Rottenberg Center. And most of their patients do come from New York State. So if that were to pass, that would effectively gut the center. And I'm sure other states are like cooking things up, but I don't know enough to like really speak on those efforts.
Okay.
I think it would be helpful to have more legislation on the benefits trafficking. You know, keeping kids near their families.
And you know,
for kids to be placed, kids in foster care or education placements in ways that it's geographically impossible for parents to participate in a meaningful way.
And you know, I misspoke. There actually was something that passed in Utah a little over a year ago that was going to put some more stringent regulations on treatment centers in place. I just forgot the bill number, but that did happen within the last year or so, and is pretty significant because such a huge percentage of these programs are in Utah.
It was a Senate Bill 127 in Utah.
That's right.
And what would you, to the people watching now, what would you recommend? I mean, they're dealing with multiple crises at once, but how could they kind of support your efforts?
Just don't send your kids away. That's not the answer. It's never going to be the answer. It never has been the answer.
So yeah, a two-pronged approach: the regulating of the congregate care that does exist, and the building of supportive in-home programs. Currently, access to supportive in-home programs is pretty restricted. In San Diego, where I am, most kids that can get intensive in-home support are either incredibly wealthy or publicly supported. In the middle, insurance isn't covering it. It isn't accessible to most people. So making intensive in-home services accessible, available, and helping families understand how that helps them would really be preventing kids from ending up in congregate care.
And
also,
probably,
sorry.
And just a general shift away from the pathologization of youth. Really, so many kids are sent away for being quote unquote troubled when there's nothing wrong with them at all. Adolescence expresses itself in a lot of different ways, and none of those ways are really remedied by being sent to a lockdown behavior modification program for years on end.
Right.
And in addition to the need for comprehensive care and comprehensive reform as well, there also needs to be an understanding of all of this has exploded in profitability and in scale because of long-term privatization of services across the board. Things have been deregulated in this country ever since Reaganomics, took effect. It's been a slow snowball, and that has really fed into this industry becoming, taken over by private equity, and now getting into the foster care industry and gutting that industry. Not like it was any pillar of excellence in the first place, but all of this, it really speaks to decades and decades of deregulation. This is the long-term effect. This is the end result, is this industry being this multi-billion-dollar behemoth, this monster that destroys kids' lives, ends up, taking kids' lives, stealing the lives of people, and cutting lives short that would otherwise, otherwise bright kids are taken and sucked into this industry and destroyed.
Absolutely.
It's the shortened life thing is not something we've touched on, but being on multiple mental health medications is a strong indicator that you won't live a long time. And then also there's a huge percentage of survivors of these programs that die of suicide.
Absolutely.
In addition to that, there also are many people that end up dying of drug overdose that end up dealing with addiction long after they get out of the facilities that they're in, including one of the people from the boot camp I was in. She passed away from a drug overdose just a few years ago. The troubled teen industry is a term for the multi-billion-dollar troubled teen industry. It is a term for the different facilities for troubled youth that represent the industry in the United States. These facilities are sometimes referred to as boot camps, wilderness therapy, secured group homes, teen ranches, reform schools, emotional growth boarding schools, therapeutic boarding schools, religious boarding schools, conversion therapy, behavioral modification schools, residential treatment centers, etc. There are an estimated 120,000 to 200,000 minors in these facilities today. Every year in the United States, an estimated $23 billion in public funds are allocated to treat the behavioral and psychological needs of vulnerable youth in troubled teen facilities. Youth find themselves in placement at the hands of child welfare and juvenile justice systems, school districts, refugee resettlement agencies, medical and mental health providers, as well as private placement from legal guardians. Most programs utilize antiquated points and levels-based systems that force the child to earn basic privileges. These systems are often punitive, tough love approaches and attempts to correct behavior instead of treating mental health issues or working through trauma. Regardless of diagnosis, children are expected to adhere to the same set of stringent rules or be harshly punished. Some of the punishments and abuses that have been reported in TTI facilities, troubled teen industry programs, include but are not limited to the following: points and levels-based systems, food and or sleep deprivation, use of isolation/solitary confinement rooms, forced to eat bodily fluids, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, dangerous use of physical, chemical, and mechanical restraint methods, the punitive use of restraints, sexual shaming and or forced sexualized behavior, sexual abuse as a part of treatment, forced and excessive exercise, forced and excessive labor, military methods of discipline, deprivation of base necessities such as water, medical care, and or access to a bathroom, restricted social interaction or social ostracization, exposure to harsh elements like extreme heat, snow or rain, use of attack therapy, group attack therapy, aversion therapy, and conversion therapy. There are a multitude of key organizations that encompass the main players, so to speak, within what's legally referred to as the congregate care industry. The vast majority of these programs and facilities are owned by powerful parent companies and organizations, such as Bain Capital, which invested heavily in Aspen Education Group in the 90s. It was founded by Mitt Romney. Bain Capital has become one of the most powerful private equity firms invested in behavioral health services for adolescents. In addition to Bain Capital, there's also Altamount Capital Partners, which is a parent company of Sequel Care and Youth Family Services. In addition to that, there's Centerbridge Partners, which is a parent company to the Mentor Network. These are two of the main for-profit foster care companies that operate in the United States. Sequel operates in tandem with the juvenile justice system. Their facilities are used as placement centers by social workers and judges. GI Partners and later on Wellspring Capital Management are the parent companies of AdoServe, aka Bellwether Behavioral Health, which provides services for youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Teen Challenge facilities are run by the Evangelical Church and founded by David Wilkerson, a close friend of both the Romney and Bush families. In addition to the Evangelical Church, the Fundamentalist Baptist Church, or the IFB for short, operates religious boarding schools throughout the United States, both utilizing similar methods of religious extremism, forced restraint, as well as physical and sexual abuse. Congregate firms such as Vision Quest also operate youth detention facilities for migrant children. Many of the philosophies that are still in use by offshoot TTI organizations have their roots in a cult called Synanon. Private adolescent behavioral health facilities operate through a self-accreditation system under an organization called NATSAP. They operate through NATSAP membership. NATSAP stands for the National Association of Therapeutic Schools and Programs. They're a United States trade organization of TTI programs and facilities, founded in 1999 by 6 TTI program founders, including John Santa and John McKinnon. All of which, aside from one of these programs, have been shut down for wide-ranging allegations of abuse. NATSAP is entirely self-regulated and operates under a system of self-accreditation and self-compliance, with no process of checking on or ensuring standards of care, nor any clearly stated disciplinary actions for those that fail to adhere to their own self-imposed guidelines. Examples of schools that are under NATSAP membership include, but are not limited to, the following: Provo Canyon School, Evoke, rebranded from Second Nature following abuse allegations; Elin School, which is now closed, as well as Montana Academy, also closed. Wilderness boot camps such as Outback, Evoke, and formerly Second Nature, and Red Rock Wilderness are NATSAP partnered and operate under the title of Research Designated Programs. The precursor to NATSAP was WASP, the Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs, which was an offshoot of Synanon that was founded in 1998 by Robert Litchfield, a close friend of Mitt Romney and one of his top campaign financiers. WASP was dissolved in the late 2000s following mounting allegations of abuse. The catalyst of WASP facilities was Cross Creek Manor. Many WASP facilities are still in operation today, though, including facilities in Mexico, Costa Rica, Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, as well as the Czech Republic. WASP has become notorious for major human rights violations, including allegations by former students that allege having been locked in dog cages, chained, and also beaten. Along with behavioral health-centered congregate care facilities, fundamentalist religious facilities encompass an additional facet to the TTI. Global Teen Challenge is a chain of thousands of evangelical Christian facilities operating through the Pentecostal World Assemblies of God. Headquartered in Columbus, Georgia, in the United States, they operate in 32 states in the United States, with over 200 facilities in the United States and Canada alone. In addition to evangelical facilities, Agape Boarding School, Bethesda Home for Girls, and the Circle of Hope are 3 examples of thousands of religious-based boarding schools that are operated by the Fundamentalist Baptist Church. Fundamentalist religious facilities operated by programs like Teen Challenge have received tens of millions of dollars in federal and state grants. Within these facilities, all communication with parents and guardians is monitored and censored, with children not being allowed to speak to each other for the first 6 months. Conversations have to follow the guidance provided by Ephesians 4:29. Let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification according to the need of the moment, that it may give grace to those who hear. If the conversation touched on forbidden subjects, the staff member would end calls with parents. Many of these facilities also operate as forced birth centers for pregnant teenagers, often taking newborns against the will of young mothers and putting them up for adoption. Many former students of Teen Challenge and IFB facilities identify with Offred, the heroine from The Handmaid's Tale. There are decades of allegations against many of these facilities, including allegations of psychological, physical, and sexual abuse, as well as torture by sadistic staff members. Many former students of these facilities allege that the facilities are involved in LGBTQ conversion therapy as well. There have been alleged instances of starvation, whipping, paddling, forced restraints, forced sedation, and denial of medical care. Currently, several active lawsuits have been filed against Agape Boarding School, with former students alleged having been beaten and sexually abused by staff. Agape denies these allegations, according to the Daily Beast.
So thank you, Veronica. You and the others here put that together, which I think is really informative, but also kind of horrifying. I wish I could go on longer. I do have to wrap up, but I appreciate I mean, it's not easy to share this. I can't really imagine just in the moment when you dealt with this, the after effects. I mean, you really deal with it forever, even if you have breakthroughs in therapy and elsewhere. So thank you so much, all of you, as well as somebody dropped off. But I appreciate you guys taking the time. And Veronica, if you want to share where people could find out more about this.
Yes. So if people wanted to learn more about SICA, about the bill, if people wanted to look more into the archive data of information about these facilities, if they go to unsilenced.org, all of the information will be available there. So once again, that's unsilenced.org, and then all of the information will be available.
Thank you so much, Rachel, Wendy, Veronica. We'll definitely stay in touch, and I'll follow through, as there's updates.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
opportunity to speak.
Absolutely. Thanks for watching, and make sure to tune in to Status Coup's daily live stream Monday through Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time and Fridays at 4 o'clock Eastern Time.